I'm taking a little break from my World Championship preview to dip into the FIDE Chess.com Grand Swiss Tournament taking place in Riga. Oh my word, this is hotting up. The top 2 players will qualify for the Candidates Tournament 2022. So it'll take place in the spring. And, well, going into this game, going into the 9th round, Alireza Firouzja, now representing France, was a point clear of the field. Now, this is sensational. He's 18 years old. He could qualify for the candidates, which at that age is a remarkable achievement. So he's a point clear going into round 9, but he faced a tough opponent, Fabiano Caruana, who's coming into some form. So I'm going to show you that game, and then I'll discuss possibilities for the final 2 rounds. I should say it's an 11-round open tournament. I can feel my voice going already. I'm going to have a quick slurp of tea before I get going on this game. It is really, really exciting game. Cheers, everybody. You have a little slug of whatever tickles your taste buds. Here we go. Fabiano Caruana with the white pieces. Even if Firouzja could just draw this game, that would leave him in a great position with 2 rounds to go. Let's see what happened. Firouzja sticks to his favourite Caro-Kann, and Caruana wants a tense fight. He closes the position, doesn't allow any exchanges. Bishop f5. So, in these closed positions, then, the tension remains for many, many moves. So Caruana, he wants that. He wants a good fight. h4. Well, this tries to gain space. Could be you just chasing the bishop down. There were several amazing games in the Tal-Botvinnik match of 1961 that went h6 and then g4 and so on. Crazy games, really interesting. h6 is a valid move, but the trend these days is just to put a stop to white's expansion with h5. There is a downside to that move. It gives white some control over the g5 square. And Caruana plays in a very simple way, just bishop d3, exchanging off those bishops. Now, one can just play e6 here, but queen a5 check from Firouzja. I mean, this is a common idea in this line. Basically, that queen is just going to nip back to this square and offer an exchange. So basically, from a Caro-Kann, we've now got a French pawn structure. You can see these locked pawns in the middle of the board. And because the bad French bishop has been exchanged off, in theory, this actually could be rather nice for black. And particularly as the h-pawn is here. And that knight can sink itself rather nicely on the f5 square. But white has space, and white also has some squares available. Here, for example, a game between Nakamura and Artemiev continued. Castles, knight f5 is a great square for the knight, and then queen a6, this absolutely typical move to exchange queens, because these endgames are actually very, very comfortable for black. And in fact, well, Artemiev, I think, got a very reasonable position here. The queen is actually on a very nice square. Looking down here, it just looks like a French, where white no longer has that important light squared bishop. He was fine. So what did Caruana do here? He didn't play a normal move. He didn't just castle. He played b4. Fabiano loves complexity. He wants to shake it up, and actually that's a good strategy in this position. You don't want to fall into a regular position as Nakamura did, where black has these positional trumps. If that's taken, then we've got a real scrap on our hands. And that rook is pretty strong on the 7th rank. So Firouzja played queen a6. So once again, the endgame, I mean, the endgame is possible for white actually, but black is comfortable enough. Queen b3. Knight f5, that's a great square for the knight. Knight f3. Knight d7, and here we go. After 15 minutes thought from Caruana, a4. Starting some queenside expansion. And again, after quite a big think, 13 minutes, Firouzja played queen c4. Now, the endgame should be pretty comfortable for black once that knight reaches the d5 square. So Caruana just played bishop d2, just guarding the pawn. Queen exchange, after all. But there is some imbalance in this position. You know, with this double pawn here, you know, sometimes white can break open with b5. f6, good move. But on the whole, this feels very comfortable for black. I like this move, putting a bit of pressure here, and also giving the king some room. Castle's kingside. Bishop e7, g3, got to protect that pawn. King f7, yeah, all good. Rook fe1, right, now we see that Caruana has some potential play here. He wants to play knight f4 and start to get some pressure on that e6 pawn. Now, black could just play rook e8 here to protect that pawn. You could also maybe bring that bishop round here to c7, put a bit of pressure on. But after a bit of thought, Firouzja simply exchanged on e5. That's quite a committal move. It means that he doesn't have to worry about the e-file opening, but he does give away that g5 square. You can see the bishop and the knight control that square, and you know, if a knight could land there, you know, after an exchange of bishops, that might be quite unpleasant. So there are pros and cons to exchanging pawns here. You know, if black can break in the middle, it should be pretty comfortable. But let's see, knight f4. Okay, that looks like a nice move. Looking here, there's potential perhaps to dip back here. Maybe even knight h3 and knight g5. Knight f4 feels like a good move. d4 from Firouzja. And he has a specific idea in mind because he wants to break with c5. And the reason he played d4 straight away is that if here, then knight takes pawn is actually pretty comfortable, pretty uncomfortable for black after white exchanges here, and there'll be a knight e5 check coming. So that's why d4 was played, and only then c5. But interestingly, even though there's no pawn here, Caruana played knight d5 anyway. That's a fascinating move. If pawn takes knight, then the pawn comes down, takes, and knight e5 check is very powerful because that knight is going to come here, and that is a very uncomfortable position for black. All of a sudden, well, yeah, those rooks are well and truly split, and there is massive pressure here. Let's come back. So that's a bit problematic for black. But Firouzja, well, he reacted quite quickly, just took here. Knight takes, knight takes. And here, Caruana thought for over 11 minutes. And he played knight g5 check, which on the surface of it looks pretty good. Bishop b4 also looks very good. He was probably just weighing up, which do I prefer, which gives me the most winning chances. So he didn't play bishop b4, but this does look quite promising for white. Perhaps knight g5 check is coming. Okay, that protects the e-pawn. But it feels like, you know, white can collect this pawn at any moment. Don't have to collect that pawn, but, you know, if the opportunity arises, why not? But there are other options here, like bringing the rook up the board, maybe hassling the king. With hindsight, this looks like a stronger move. But knight g5 check, well, I can understand why Caruana went for this. You know, that is a big pawn to take. But Firouzja reacted very coolly. And actually, it's not so clear, this position. So this pawn is attacked. f4. King f5. This is a great defense. Firouzja gives away the g7 pawn. Well, the king shouldn't come up the board. That looks really perilous. Could end up in a mating net very, very easily. So the king comes back, then knight e6, and then king f5 again. So if Caruana wants it, he's got to draw with knight g7. But why would you want to draw in this position when you're a pawn up? This looks like a powerful passed pawn. Knight g5, ready to push that pawn. And at the moment, it doesn't feel like black has much counterplay. But watch what happens. Knight c5 hits this pawn. Okay, so, you know, there's a bit of a blockade on these light squares. Knight f7 with a threat. With a nasty knight fork. King e6. Knight d6. That knight buzzing round, and, you know, Caruana wants to push with f5 to get those pawns rolling. Rook g8. Attacks this one. King g2. King d5, preempting f5. So, obviously, if f5, then knight takes e5 will happen. So it's not so easy to push those pawns. And in the meantime, black has counterplay. That pawn is threatened. The king looks suddenly very good in the middle. Pass pawn here. Okay, game on. Rook b1. And here I wonder whether Firouzja thought, right, this is my moment. I'm going to strike here. Because white's king looks a bit passive. These pawns seem to be under control. He could just wait here. It's very difficult to see how white is going to make progress there. But Firouzja, maybe he sensed that this was his moment. He played knight e4. So that brings black's king into the heart of white's position. Rook c1, king d3. What a mad king march. You don't have to play king there. Maybe you can just shuffle with the rook. Rook e8. That's potentially okay for black, but this looks incredibly dangerous. King e2, dangerous for white. I mean, look, these pieces can't really move. This pawn threatens to come down the board. Well, I can imagine that Firouzja was kind of seduced by this line. But now e6. Counterplay. f5. The pawns advance. And suddenly this is quite a difficult position. Knight d4 played. Bishop takes b4. And now d2. Bishop takes, king takes. Rook here. So white has 3 pawns for the piece. The rook covers this pawn. The pawn threatens to advance to e7. And that king, now there's no longer a passed pawn to support. The king is just looking like it's stranded across the other side of the board. It's crossed the river and there's no way back. So suddenly things have swung around completely. Rook e8 played, so at least that stops e7. Rook e5. Okay, the king wants to come back. Now, how does white make progress? Remember, the secret of good technique is good calculation. And both sides invested some time here. Particularly Firouzja, I think he realised that he was in trouble. Now here, Caruana just had a bit of a think before he proceeded. Absolutely right. You don't guess at this kind of position. You just number crunch it. He saw that e7, of course, that's the first move you look at. But then knight c6 attacks rook and pawn. Check. Here, I mean, this is quite a forcing line. So if king takes, then pawn to f7. But knight takes pawn. King here. Takes, rook check. Of course, White is a pawn up, has good winning chances, but it's not absolutely crystal clear. In this position, you want to try and force a win. And king f2 is the move. That's a very clever move. Because watch what... Okay, let's just pass. What happens? How does this change the position? Let's see what happens if black just passes. a6, for example. Okay, now we push. Knight c6. Here's the difference. With the king on f2, now the rook can come back with check, gaining a tempo, and f6 supports the pawn, and that is game over. White is winning. That's why king f2 was played, in order to enable this check on e3. So rook e7. What do we do about that? Stops rook e7. g4. Again, this had to be calculated, and Caruana did it perfectly. King g3. Well, if black transposes to a rook and pawn endgame, that is very clear with a nice passed pawn, and the rook controlling. The rook is able to support that pawn. That's game over. Yeah, knight c6, f6. That one goes through. So rook e8 played. King takes, knight c6. And now again some very nice calculation. King f4, of course. If that's exchanged off, then one of these is going through. Knight e7. f6. That had to be calculated carefully. Watch what happens. Knight check. This is the game continuation. Obviously taking the rook is losing again. Knight check. King here. Forces knight check. King f4. And now, well, basically the knight is attacked and one of these pawns is going through. Of course, if same story, knight takes rook, king takes, one of the pawns goes through. So knight d4, e7, f7. It's Space Invaders time. And here, simple winning move. Rook d5 check, followed by f8 queen on the next turn. Wow, what a fantastic struggle. Both sides, you know, really going for it. Very complex position. I mean, I'm curious to know what Firouzja was thinking around about this position, but I have a feeling that he thought he might have had some winning chances after his move knight e4. But you can just wait with b6. And it rebounded on him. Great struggle. So, what does that mean for the standings? Well, with 2 rounds to go, after round 9, there are now 3 players sharing the lead. We have Alireza Firouzja on 6.5, Fabiano Caruana on 6.5, and David Howell from England also on 6.5. He defeated, who did he defeat? Korobov in the last round. He's won his last 4 games. He's bounced right back. So with 2 rounds to go, 3 players share the lead on 6.5. And then there are 10 players a half point behind on 6. So we could be on for the most dramatic pile-up photo finish at the end of 11 rounds. We'll see. Crucial pairing in round 10, the penultimate round. Firouzja white against David Howell. So can Firouzja bounce back? This is going to be a test of his nerves. Can he hold it together? And second board pairing, Caruana has black against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. That is not an easy one. I'll report back on events, but do check out the live commentary from Riga. It's Stuart Conquest and Anna Muzichuk commentating. So, you know, really good commentary team. And this is just going to be a really dramatic finale, excuse me, to the event. Don't forget, like, comment, share and subscribe. And do consider supporting us via PayPal or Patreon. Check out the links there. Thanks for watching.